In May 1940, Hitler's armies had swept west from Germany through Holland, Belgium and France. This resulted in the British Expeditionary Force who were facing them and the other Allied forces being forced back towards the North Sea. As a result of this, the Allies were soon surrounded at the small town of Dunkirk, which is near the border with Belgium. On the 26th of May 1940, the War Office sent a cipher, which is a coded message, to the Admiralty stating that the evacuation should commence immediately. They were really concerned that because the soldiers were trapped on the beaches with no potential escape, it could have been devastating. The following day, orders were sent out to requisition small craft and shallow drafts that could operate on the beaches of Dunkirk. This meant that small boats were needed. I'm sure you've noticed that large ships don't come up close to the beach because they would end up running aground, they'd be stuck, and they wouldn't be able to then travel onwards. So what was required was smaller boats which had the ability to go into shallow waters. And that is where the little ships of Lee become part of our story. During that time period, the fishermen in Lee would have been expected to get their information from the Honorary Commodore, who would tell them where they could fish each day. On this day in particular, he informed them that they were needed by the Navy at nearby Southend because they wanted volunteer crews to take their boats to Dunkirk. Now I think we have to remember at this point that for those fishermen from Lee, they would have been unfamiliar with what it was like to take their boats into the sea. They would have mainly fished in and around the estuary and certainly would not have ventured much further. So to be potentially asked to do this was something rather unusual. They were to be at the pierhead ready for sea by 8 o'clock on the Friday morning. Once they were there, they were given the things that would be required: fuel, rations, and if necessary, extra deckhands. At noon on the 31st of May 1940, Endeavour, with her skipper P.O. Halls and the rest of the crew, which included James Colin Peter Stroud and Norman Ewing, along with 5 other boats from Lee, the Renown, the Reliant, Letitia, Resolute and Defender, set out for Dunkirk as part of Operation Dynamo. You might recognise those names: Defender, Resolute, Renown, for some particular reason. Does anyone know what that might be? Unlike many of the other small ships that have been requisitioned, the Lee boats went out with their own experienced crews. Nevertheless, many of the Lee fishermen had never been out of the Thames estuary before. It's remarkable. Just after 2 o'clock, the flotilla reached Margate and was ordered to sail to France. The boats travelled across the channel under engine power, but between 6:20 in the evening and 7:20, the flotilla was scattered by an attack from the enemy aircraft. Fortunately, the RAF Spitfires soon were at hand and downed at least 5 of the attacking planes. Shortly afterwards, the regrouped Lee boats reached Dunkirk. But before they reached there, they were able to see it so clearly from miles away, due to the huge flames and the smoke from the burning oil tanks on the shore. I can only imagine how terrifying this must have been for those fishermen, who were used to the calmer waters and the safety of the Thames estuary, certainly not being under attack from the Luftwaffe, or heading towards a place that seemed so dangerous, and most certainly was. Very shortly, we're going to share some actual video footage that is from that time period, and it's probably not quite how you imagine. Initially, the little boats would have been picking up men from closer to the shore and taking them to larger vessels in the deeper water. But as the time went on and as the tide changed, what they were doing needed to change also. At 9:30, the boats started to embark troops from outside the jetty, transferring them to various barges a little further away. An hour later, the swell of the water forced them inside the harbour walls. They entered in formation, picking their way through the debris from a sunken destroyer in the entrance to the walls, where they picked up men to transfer them to some other larger boats. Many of the troops were initially reluctant to trust their luck to such small craft, but it's officially acknowledged that the Lee boats rescued hundreds of troops from certain death. Unfortunately, the Endeavour was damaged during the rescue, with its rudder being smashed. Together with its sister ships, the Letitia and the Renown, they had to be towed back to Ramsgate. Tragically, the Renown hit a mine during the return journey and was destroyed, with the loss of 4 crew. There is a memorial in the churchyard of St Clement's, and if you're walking down to Lee, perhaps you've noticed it before, and if you haven't, maybe the next time you go down past the church, you can have a look to see that very important memorial. Admiral Ramsay, who was in command of Operation Dynamo, said about the Lee boats the following: "The conduct of the crews of these cockle boats was exemplary. They were all volunteers who were rushed over to Dunkirk in one day. Probably none of them had been under gunfire before, and certainly none of them had been under naval discipline. These were Thames estuary fishing boats, which never left the estuary, and only one of their crews had been further afield than Ramsgate. Yet they maintained perfect formation throughout the day and night, and all orders were obeyed with great diligence, even under actual shell fire and aircraft attack." For someone so important to speak so highly really tells us what a tremendous job those volunteers did. In total, 338,226 soldiers, of which 198,229 were British and 139,997 were French, were rescued by the hastily assembled fleet, including the 700 privately owned boats that made up the little ships of Dunkirk. It certainly is a remarkable story, and quite a privilege to have been able to learn more about it in previous years, especially if you ever have the opportunity to see the Endeavour, which is often sitting outside the Peterboat down Old Lee. It's not there at the moment, unfortunately, so at least we're not missing out due to the fact that we haven't been able to go down to Old Lee at this moment in time. In a moment I'm going to share with you some actual footage taken from the beaches of Dunkirk and from some of the ships on their way to and from. Let's end with something that some people may have heard about or maybe even have seen. Recently there was a movie called Dunkirk, chronicling the stories of various people during this amazing time. Keep your eyes open, for I'm certain you'll notice within the short clip an appearance by the Endeavour as it made the journey again, albeit for theatrical reasons.
A curtain of darkness hangs over the coast of Britain. The dark shadow of ships flash their signals to the shore. As dawn breaks, Pathé Gazette's cameraman is on a tiny merchant ship. He is risking his life to bring you the pictures. He is on his way to Dunkirk. Every few seconds he sees other ships returning, ships of all shapes and sizes, manned by sailors and merchantmen of Britain. Wireless operators are at their posts. Each ship is filled with the men of the BEF and of the French army in Flanders. They are on their way home from the hell that is Dunkirk. Since these pictures were taken, we have all heard the full story from the Prime Minister of how the Royal Navy, using nearly 1,000 ships, has brought back nearly 350,000 men. Now you are off burning Dunkirk. Now you are to see that evacuation in progress. You will see the Navy in action, Nazi planes overhead. You will see the beaches of Dunkirk under enemy fire, our own guns replying. You will see the calm waters dotted with hundreds of men as they wade or swim out to the ships. Here in pictures is the triumph that turned a major military disaster into a miracle of deliverance. Here in one staggering shot, the Allied armies come out from the shore. That one amazing picture symbolizes the miracle of deliverance, which in the words of the Prime Minister was achieved by valor, by perseverance, by perfect discipline, by skill and by unconquerable vitality. All the might of the German Air Force failed to stop them. We beat them back. We got our armies away. And the enemy paid fourfold for our losses. And now we're on our way home. The ships are gliding into a British port. The men of the BEF are stepping once again onto British soil. The men who were carried out of the jaws of death. For a time also we are playing host to thousands of French soldiers. Let us show them how we feel about the way they fought side by side with us. But the greatest tribute must go to the men of the rear guard. Their job was to fight on until the evacuation was almost complete. They have suffered terribly. They have left behind thousands of dead. They fought their last battle from the water's edge before they dived in and swam out to the ships. Most of them are very dirty and pretty ragged, but they're unshaken and not a bit shy. And now we look to the future. The BEF will be rebuilt under its brilliant commander, Lord Gort. We shall go on to the end. We shall not fail. We shall fight on the seas and on the oceans. We shall fight in the air. We shall fight on the beaches, in the fields, in the streets and on the hills, as we fought in blazing Dunkirk. And like the men who smashed their way out from the hellish beaches of Flanders, we shall never surrender.
What do you see?